Hello, welcome to 5 Minutes in Mark. My name is Larry. I'm one of the teachers at North Park, and today I get the privilege of leading us in a look at Mark chapter 10, verse 46 through 52. In this section of Mark, Jesus is on the road to Jerusalem. It tells us that back in verse 32. They were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking on ahead of them. And so he's on the way to Jerusalem, and we know that ultimately there in Jerusalem there's going to be the triumphal entry. There's going to be the upper room and all that happens there. Ultimately, there's going to be Gethsemane, and then his crucifixion. So there's a lot that's coming in the next several days. And Jesus is on the road. He's on the way there. And in verse 46, it says, they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd, a beggar named Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the road. And when he heard that it was Jesus, the Nazarene, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Many were sternly telling him to be quiet, but he kept crying out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, call him here. So they called the blind man, saying to him, take courage, stand up, he's calling for you. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped up and came to Jesus, and answering him, Jesus said, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabboni, I want to regain my sight. And Jesus said to him, go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and began following him on the road. Let's make a couple of observations of what's going on here. First, Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus. Mark tells us, even in the text, he defines what Bartimaeus means. Bar, son of Timaeus, son of Timaeus. Timaeus would be unclean or defiled. So Bartimaeus, son of the defiled. Bartimaeus, this blind man who is a beggar, he would be an outcast along the road, and he's begging because in that day, how else would a blind man be fed or have sustenance? He has to beg for his needs, and so he's doing that. And there's people around him as Jesus is coming through, and he's crying out to him when he hears who he is. He identifies him as the Son of God, or Son of David, I'm sorry. Very few had the insight of this Bartimaeus, and he realizes the predicted Son of David is here, and so he cries out to him, and people are telling him to be quiet. And he cries out all the more, and he cries out for mercy. Jesus calls him and says, come here. And so he comes, and Jesus says, what will you have me to do for you? And Lord, I want to receive my sight. Jesus heals not only his physical need of sight, but his spiritual need of rebirth. And so this man follows Jesus. What a wonderful story. I wanted to take a minute to look at the priorities of Jesus. Jesus, we know, is on the way to Jerusalem. He's going to be killed ultimately as a result of that. And yet in the midst of that, he takes the time to stop and to interact with this Bartimaeus and to fill out his real need, not only for physical sight, but for spiritual salvation. Jesus takes time for the outcast. And so for us, in the midst of our life, not just in the busyness of it, but in this day when so much is going on in our lives with this coronavirus and a lockdown and all that's going on, I want us to ask a question. What can we learn from the priorities of Jesus? Jesus, who's going to be killed, not just killed, he's going to be under the curse of his Father, and he knows what's coming, and yet he still takes the time to condescend to care for this blind man. What about us in our day? How can we apply this to our lives? How about in the midst of this, that we're willing to set ourselves aside for the rights and needs of others, that we're willing to put down that gut response we have to want to, in your face, reply to stay home orders and other things that really don't sit well with us. And how about if with a submissive spirit, particularly for those of us who know Christ and are a part of his church, How about if out of love for one another we condescend to do things that make us uncomfortable, to love the weak who are among us, and to be able to help sustain one another? How about when the church regathers, we're willing to set aside as many of our own personal rights as we can so that we can love on those who are weak? And so we will wear masks and we will social distance and we'll do whatever it takes, not because we have to, but because we get to, because we have a Lord who modeled for us what it is to set aside the prerogative of being the living God, to serve the needs of weak people who simply need the touch of Him to meet their immediate need. And let's be an extension of His grace to one another and to the world around us as we go through difficult times, because we get to model the Master.